Mary Shelley was only 18 when she wrote her most enduring work of fiction, Frankenstein. At the time, audiences were shocked that such a gruesome tale could be written by a young girl. The daughter of radical political philosopher William Godwin and proto-feminist icon Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary was something of a literary celebrity even before she started writing. She was the center of a scandal when she eloped with famous anarchist and romantic poet Percy Shelley. Even more scandalous, Percy was already married at the time. The two were said to have romantic trysts visiting at the graveside of Mary's dead mother. Pretty goth. The novel itself was born from a friendly contest, a party game, between Mary, Percy, another famous poet, Lord Byron, and their friend John Polidori. The goal was to make up a ghost story. Mary Shelley recalls this in her introduction to the 1831 edition. She set to tell a story which would, quote, speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaken thrilling horror, one to make the reader dread to look around, to curdle the blood, and to quicken the beating of the heart. She had a hard time coming up with the story. The other dudes, renowned poets and authors, all took their turns, but Mary asked for some more time to think of something worth telling. Then she had a dream. I saw with shut eyes but acute mental vision. I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then on the working of some powerful engine show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-final motion. His success would terrify the artist. He would rush away from his odious handiwork, horror-stricken. He would hope that left to itself the slight spark of life which he had communicated would fade, and that this thing which had received such imperfect animation would subdue into dead matter, and he might sleep in the belief that the silence of the grave would quench forever the transient existence of the hideous corpse which had looked upon as the cradle of life. He sleeps, but he is awakened. He opens his eyes. Behold, the horrid thing stands at his bedside, opening his curtains and looking on him with yellow, watery, but speculative eyes. From there, the tale went to dream, to campfire ghost story, to a massively popular novel. Within a few years, unlicensed stage adaptations were being produced across England. The most famous was Richard Brinsley Peake's play Presumption, or The Fate of Frankenstein. The play takes plenty of liberties and employs some of the most cutting-edge technology for the stage in the early 19th century. At the end of the play, Victor kills the monster and himself by causing an avalanche. The play was said to be so scary grown men were fainting in the aisles from fright. Mary saw it, not impressed. All this means that from the earliest start, the story of Frankenstein and the monster has been wrapped up in transmediation. This is a fancy theoretical term that refers to the study of how texts appear differently across different media. Marshall McLuhan, a 20th century philosopher of media theory, famously said, "The medium is the message." That means that the meaning of a text will be informed by the method of its delivery. And with every new delivery, a new meaning can be made. And Frankenstein has had no end of new deliveries. The first iteration of Frankenstein on film was from the Edison Company in 1910. This silent film, directed by J. Searle Darley, was part of an attempt to legitimize film as a medium. Shelley's text was so universally recognized as real art and culture, this new form appropriated it to lend itself legitimacy. It's a weird little film. I've linked to the whole thing on Moodle in the additional resources section. It's only about 10 minutes. Two interesting things here, though. One of them is that the monster is grown in a vat using chemistry. We're often given the idea that Victor creates the monster by reanimating a corpse, but that's not what the novel tells us. Victor's monster in Shelley's text is not a reanimated dead body. It's a brand new creation. This film is, I think, the only one that keeps that detail. Second is the way the monster is destroyed at the end. Now, every film, almost every film, does this. The monster dies and Victor lives. That alone should be something for us to think about and how the meaning is shifted across media. We should also look carefully at how the monster dies. It's weird. He's trapped in a mirror and then just gone. Given the amount of parallels Shelley sets up between Victor and his creation, the simple solution this film went for, Victor just walks away from the mirror, is pretty baffling. The best known Frankenstein is, of course, Boris Karloff's 1931 portrayal of the monster. This version of Frankenstein is almost as iconic as Shelley's text. The thing we get back here, interestingly, is the sympathy bit. But we also lose all the complexity of the monster's speech, his mind, his reading Milton. This monster is really just a wild animal. What does that tell us about the way we are viewing threats to our social cohesion in the early part of the 20th century? Kenneth Branagh's 1994 film titled Mary Shelley's Frankenstein sets itself up as a direct translation of Shelley's text to film. It's not. But why would it think it has to pretend to be? What's happening in the mid-90s that's making people want to have some sort of fidelity to the text or pretensions to high literature? We're dealing with the early repercussions of postmodernism and wide-ranging fears of cultural change, but also have some resistance about returning to religious texts for stability. So we turn to Shelley. But the weird thing is, Branagh changes some really significant things in this film. The biggest one is this: after the monster murders Elizabeth, Victor dusts off his monster-making gear and reanimates her corpse. The monster shows up to claim her as his bride. But then, and this is nuts, Elizabeth wants none of it. She sets herself on fire and jumps out of a window. Not quite what Shelley was up to, I think. Still, Robert De Niro nails it with his portrayal of the monster. He's articulate, complex, terrifying, but totally sympathetic. So while the movie sets out to target a conservative audience in search of stability through secular holiness, they get radical feminist self-immolation and a reminder to treat people who look different from them with a little bit of human compassion. There are other translations of this text too. One of my favorites is Mel Brooks's Young Frankenstein. In this send-up, Victor's long-lost descendant inherits his ancestors' castle, papers, and laboratory. Of course, he ends up making a monster, but instead of casting the monster out, Victor takes him in, teaches him, cares for him, eventually sacrificing part of his own brain so the monster can gain the power of speech. Here's the genius thing about this movie. Visually, it follows the Karloff film from the 1930s, but the message is far more in line with Shelley's text, just reversed. If Frankenstein is about the failure of being a good father to the thing we make, Young Frankenstein gives us a model of what that good father would look like. Patient, enduring, self-sacrificing. The movie ends with a marriage. It's literally, in every sense, the comic version of Shelley's tragedy, and so also acknowledges the deeply important message in Shelley's original text. One of the terms literary scholars use for the exploration of the impact and repurposing of a text is to refer to the text's afterlives, the way it is resurrected or reanimated, trotted out on stage in a certain time and place. But every time we see it again, even if it's a little more tattered, a little more decomposed, it has echoes of that original life. And those echoes are one of the things transmediation can dig up for us. Not just how a text gets repurposed for specific historical or cultural ends, but how every reiteration is in dialogue with that first telling. The 1818 text, the 1816 ghost story, or even the nightmare of an 18-year-old girl that started it all.